Junction by Cody Schlegel. If you're looking for a fairy tale, you won't find it here. Part 2. During their 2-hour drive home, Nick and Ryan dabbled in conversations ranging from the meaning of life to psychedelic drugs. Their interest in psychedelics often intersected with their interest in the spirit world. Although most of the Harmon boys' looks came from the white man genes of Grandpa George, a majority of their beliefs came from a shared heritage of native roots. Their grandmother had been born and raised on the Indian reservation in Florida. No electricity, no water, no committees to deal with bullying, and certainly no one to call if there was a gator problem. In those days, if there was any kind of problem, they handled it themselves. She had grown up around the type of spiritual setting that placed an appreciable amount of importance on preserving a connection with the great Creator. If believers remain close to this entity, it will guide them and keep them in touch with what really matters. The rest is meaningless. Regarding the use of psychedelics in seeking spiritual enlightenment, a wise man once said, "Whether or not your trip is real, the experience is." There's a lot of power in those words. Millions of people flock to the steeple every Sunday with no real knowledge or belief of what they're taking in. Most who go to church expect to have their tickets punched to a place beyond the stars. As a result, they leave their pews with no spiritual connection or experience. Those same folks will criticize the less conventional and sometimes illegal experiences and chalk it up to people's brains reacting to poison. They find more importance in the Book of God and the House of God than in the journey to God. Nick and Ryan made it to Junction at 5:30 p.m. as the sun tucked itself away in the gray Iowa sky. "I don't really feel like going home," Nick said. "Want to grab a beer at 5 Span? "Might as well." Ryan rarely declined an invite to the local watering hole, and he didn't have anything important waiting at home. Back in the 1800s, Junction, Iowa was quite a place. Right off the Mississippi River, brothels, saloons, and casinos lined this former little piece of vice-supplying heaven. Lanterns of Indian fishermen, feather, not dot Indian, hovered over the river like fireflies as incoming boats brought in fresh fur. In addition to seeing increasing money and trade, Junction eventually became a crucial stop along the Underground Railroad. These days, with Junction's population at 3,500, the 5 Span Bar was one of the few wonders that had survived the changing times. The entire place was the photographic definition of what a dive bar should be. Years of cigarette smoke caked the walls, lingering from a time with no laws. If the posters, neon signs, and sports schedules from the late 80s and early 90s could talk, they'd fill several books with stories. And of course, there was piss, that distinct smell of piss that had collected through the years. The men's restroom had only one urinal and one toilet with no stall door, but there was enough piss on that floor to scare off any self-respecting insect or rodent. Nick and Ryan grabbed their usual stools on the far side of the bar opposite the door. The 5 Span didn't get particularly busy on any given night of the week, but traffic picked up during the holidays. With Thanksgiving only a couple of days away, beer sales were way up. On this evening, the typical regulars savored some brews after a long day in the cold, injecting female hogs with vials of semen. Nick knew the men wore gloves during this process. He also knew they showered in and out of their respective farms. Still, he couldn't help but stare at the fingertips as they transferred cash to the bartender, who in turn would be handling his beer. "Ugh," Nick said, moving his eyes to the bar's well. A random voice howled out from a few stools down. "There's a couple troublemakers if I've ever seen 'em." Jack Billy Bonney was a good-looking old-timer with a snowy, well-kept beard. Even when he wasn't trying to be funny, he was absolutely hysterical. "What's good, Billy?" Ryan asked, holding up his beer. "Not a goddamn thing. What's new with you boys?" "Same as you," Nick said, taking a swig. After setting his bottle down, he noticed a Band-Aid covering a cotton ball on Billy's arm. "What happened there? Penicillin shot?" "No," Billy cackled. "I had to get blood injected." "Blood injected?" Ryan said. "What the hell for?" I'm getting old. Earlier that day, Billy had to travel to a hospital an hour away from Junction. In the short time he was out of town, he crossed paths with 3 black people, more than he'd seen in person over the past 6 years combined. Billy's nurse also happened to fit into this category. When she came into the room and prepared his arm for the injection, everything was textbook. Then he asked, "That blood you're putting in me, is that a black man's blood?" "Excuse me?" Billy repeated himself as if he were speaking to a child. "That blood you're putting in me, is that a black man's blood?" "Sir, I have no way of knowing that. The blood is O positive. I think that's all that matters." Billy sat still, letting the air turn painfully awkward. "Well, hopefully it came from a black man," he said. "Maybe my dick will get a little bigger." His goofy laugh carried out into the hallway as the woman walked out of his room in tears, cracking up. Both had made a new friend that day. Billy never did clarify why he had to have the blood injected, but after several more beers and a few more anecdotes, Nick went outside to grab a fresh breath of air. Once halfway to the door, his cousin Zach Harmon walked in with his lackeys Corey and Dusty Sheets. It was clear that Zach was the one in charge. Whenever Nick saw the 3 of them out together, he thought of Zach as a greasy, corn-fed redneck walking his matching guard dogs. As usual, Nick didn't acknowledge Zach, and Zach didn't acknowledge Nick, but anytime the 2 were near one another, no one could ignore the complicated sparks firing between their auras. At the age of 30, Zach was a full year older than Nick. 12 years earlier, the 2 were inseparable. Nick had a lot of firsts with Zach, Corey, and Dusty. They shared their first beers together, got into the same trouble together, and chased the same girls together. But everything changed on one fateful afternoon. Zach had just turned 18. He and Nick were leaving school and were almost out of the parking lot when 2 Junction cop cars swerved in and cut them off. "What the fuck is this about?" Nick didn't have a clue. That morning, Zach had bought an 8-ball of coke and was spotted by one of the school narcs. After this information passed hands a few times, Junction's finest were on the case. Zach never asked, and he didn't imply, but Nick jumped on the grenade and said the coke belonged to him. He was still a juvenile and had no priors, unlike Zach, whose reputation with the teachers and around the community wasn't quite as stellar as his younger cousins. All Nick expected from Zach was a thank you and for him to be honest about what had happened when the time came to tell the family. The thank you came that day, but Zach never revealed the truth to the family, and Nick had been bitter ever since. Outside the 5-span, the air was hitting its lowest temperature of the night. Nick was ready to go back inside, but hesitant because they'd just shown up. Another 5 minutes of inner debate, Nick heard the door creak open, and Zach, Corey, and Dusty walked out. Again, Nick didn't pay them any mind, and they returned the favor, loading up in the noisy, lifted confines of Zach's old diesel truck and cruising away without a single word spoken. Weird. They weren't here to drink. Back at the bar, Ryan could smell Nick before seeing him. The thick smell of cinnamon stirred as Nick whipped off his black peacoat. "What were they doing in here?" Nick asked. "They're looking for Joey." "Really?" "Yeah, said they couldn't get a hold of him." Strange. Joey Sheeks was Corey and Dusty's older brother. He was 33 and had his own place, but his drug use alone was enough to call him a total loss. On the other hand, he was known for being an impeccably honest dealer and had great prices on phenomenal product. "Have you tried to get a hold of him?" Ryan asked. "No, but I still owe him money. He'll be getting a hold of me. I gotta take a piss. I'll be right back." Meanwhile, 10 miles away, in a secluded woods, a naked male body lay frozen in the otherwise undisturbed snow. The solidity of the icy corpse said it had been exposed for at least 2 or 3 days. There didn't appear to be any signs of a struggle, but something bad had happened. Something evil had happened. Joey Sheeks would need to thaw out before any real evidence could be collected.